Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku inherited the Speed Force but couldn't stop running. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world had ended, not with a bang, but with the quiet, metallic click of a rooftop access door closing. Izuku Midoriya stood alone, the gray sky of Muzurifa pressing down on him like a physical weight. The air was thick and humid, promising a storm that felt like a pathetic reflection of the one already raging inside his chest. Each breath was a shard of glass in his lungs. His own personal hero, the symbol of peace, the man whose smile could stop villains and calm cities, had looked him in the eye and gently, kindly, irrevocably dismantled his soul. It's not bad to dream. But you also have to consider what's realistic. The words echoed in the hollow space where his heart used to be. They chased each other in a frantic, dizzying loop, each repetition sharpening their edges. He could still feel the phantom pressure of All Might's hand on his shoulder, a gesture meant to be comforting that had felt like the final nail being hammered into the coffin of his lifelong ambition. His legs, heavy as lead, finally obeyed some distant command from his brain. He walked to the railing, his worn red sneakers scuffing against the gravel. The city spread out below, a sprawling, living thing full of noise and light and people with quirks. People with futures. He leaned over, the wind whipping his green-black hair across his face. For a terrifying, fleeting moment, he understood the impulse Bakugo had so casually thrown at him earlier that day. If you want to be a hero that badly, there's a quick way to do it. Believe that you'll have a quirk in your next life and take a swan dive off the roof. His knuckles were white where he gripped the cool metal bar. No. He wouldn't. He couldn't do that to his mom. The thought of her face, her tears, was the only anchor he had left in the swirling vortex of his despair. He pushed himself away from the edge and walked back to the door. The journey down the concrete stairwell was a descent into a deeper kind of darkness. Each step was a funeral dirge for his dream. He clutched the strap of his yellow backpack, the corner of his burnt and waterlogged notebook digging into his back. Hero Analysis for the Future, number 13. It felt like a book of childish fairy tales now, a monument to his own foolishness. All those hours, all that meticulous research, all that hope, it was all just the sad, obsessive hobby of a quirkless, useless Deku. When he finally emerged back onto the street, the world seemed muted. The colors were less vibrant, the sounds of traffic and chatter distant and muffled. He was a ghost haunting the edges of his own life. He didn't choose a direction so much as let his feet carry him, his head bowed, his gaze fixed on the cracks in the pavement. He was on autopilot, his body executing the well-worn path home while his mind was trapped on that rooftop, replaying the execution of his spirit. He saw All Might's skeletal form, the steam hissing from his body. He heard the story of the injury, the ticking clock on his heroism. It should have been a moment of incredible connection, a secret shared between him and his idol. Instead, it had been used as the final, irrefutable piece of evidence in the case against him. Even I, the symbol of peace, am this vulnerable. What chance could a quirkless boy possibly have? He stumbled, catching himself on a lamppost. He hadn't even realized he was crying until a hot tear dripped from his chin onto his hand. He wiped his face with the back of his sleeve, a ragged, hitching sob escaping his throat. It was humiliating. Crying in the middle of the street like a lost child. But he was lost, more lost than he had ever been in his life. The sky had grown darker, the promised storm finally deciding to make its move. The clouds were bruised, churning purple-gray, and a low rumble echoed from the horizon. The first fat drops of rain began to fall, splattering against the concrete in dark, coin-sized circles. People around him quickened their pace, popping open umbrellas, ducking into shops. Izuku didn't notice. The cool rain on his skin was a dull, distant sensation. He found himself walking through a familiar underpass, the one he'd been attacked in just hours before. The curved concrete walls amplified the sound of the growing storm, the rumble of thunder sounding like a giant's footsteps. The lights within flickered erratically. He kept his head down, not wanting to look at the spot where the sludge villain had poured out of the sewer grate, where his life had almost ended before All Might saved him, where his hope had been given a brief, glorious reprieve before being extinguished for good. That's when the world changed. There was a sound unlike any thunder he had ever heard. It wasn't a crack, it was a tear. A high-frequency shriek that seemed to rip through the very fabric of the air. The lights in the underpass didn't just flicker, they exploded in a shower of sparks. Izuku flinched, looking up just in time to see it. Outside the mouth of the tunnel, a bolt of lightning descended. But it wasn't the stark white or pale blue of a normal storm. It was a furious, living thing, a jagged spear of violent crimson intertwined with brilliant, impossible gold. It didn't strike the ground. It slammed directly into the side of a large, green power transformer perched on a concrete slab near the road. The resulting explosion was instantaneous and blinding. For a single, silent, crystalline moment, everything was white. Izuku threw his arms up to shield his eyes, but the light seemed to pass right through them. He felt a colossal pressure wave, but it wasn't just air. It was energy. The smell of ozone was overwhelming, mixed with something else, something that smelled like cinnamon and hot metal and the static of a television tuned to a dead channel. He saw the energy arc. It leaped from the ruined, smoking transformer, a furious serpent of red and gold lightning. It should have grounded itself, dissipated into the wet earth. It didn't. It moved with a terrifying, predatory intelligence. It shot across the 20 feet of open space, straight towards the only other conductive presence nearby, straight towards him. Izuku Midoriya didn't have time to scream. He didn't have time to think. His world became a torrent of pure, unadulterated sensation. It felt like every cell in his body was being simultaneously ripped apart and slammed back together. A roaring, thrumming vibration seized him, shaking him not just physically, but on a molecular, atomic level. It wasn't pain. It was too much, too fast, too total to be pain. It was a baptism by fire, a rewriting of his fundamental code. The image of the crimson gold lightning was burned onto the backs of his eyelids, and then, there was only a thundering, vibrating whiteness, and silence. Consciousness returned not as a gentle tide, but as a violent system reboot. Ground, sky, concrete. Why is it vibrating? Izuku was on his back, staring up at the curved ceiling of the underpass. A fine dust of pulverized concrete drifted down. His ears rang with a high-pitched hum, and beneath it, a deeper thrumming. It wasn't in his ears, it was in his bones, in his teeth. A low, insistent, full-body vibration that felt like he was leaning against a colossal, invisible engine. He pushed himself up. His limbs felt strange. Not weak, but coiled. Every muscle fiber felt like a taut wire, humming with a terrifying potential energy. He looked at his hands. They seemed to shimmer at the edges, a barely perceptible blur. He shook his head, trying to clear it. Must have been the explosion. A concussion? He got to his feet, a wave of dizziness washing over him. His backpack felt unnaturally light. He needed to get home. His mom would be frantic. The storm, the news of the villain attack. She would be out of her mind with worry. Mom, he whispered, his voice hoarse. He took a step. Or he intended to take a step. A simple, forward motion. A tired shuffle to get him out of the tunnel and back on the path home. Instead, the world dissolved into a sickening, incomprehensible blur of motion. His foot pushed off the ground, and rather than covering 2 feet of distance, it propelled him forward with the force of a cannonball. The underpass, which should have taken him 10 more seconds to exit, vanished behind him in a fraction of a second. He was suddenly in the street, the rain hitting him not as drops, but as a solid, stinging wall of water. A car horn blared, a long, drawn-out sound that seemed to stretch for an eternity. He saw the vehicle crawling towards him, the driver's face a mask of frozen horror. Panic, pure and undiluted, seized him. He tried to stop, to dig his heels in, but his body was a foreign object subject to laws of physics he didn't understand. The momentum was absolute. He flailed, trying to pinwheel his arms to regain balance. This was a mistake. The slight shift in his center of gravity sent him careening to the right. He shot down a narrow alleyway between 2 apartment buildings, a streak of green and black against the grimy brick. A dumpster loomed. He yelped, a high-pitched, distorted sound, and threw himself sideways. His shoulder clipped the brick wall, but instead of a painful impact, there was a strange, buzzing sensation, and he passed through the corner of the building, emerging in a shower of brick dust and vibrating, phantom pain. He didn't have time to process the impossibility of what just happened. The alley spit him back out onto another street, then another. He was a pinball, ricocheting off a world that was suddenly made of slow-moving syrup. His mind, still operating at a human pace, was struggling to catch up with a body that was breaking the sound barrier in short, uncontrolled bursts. Stop! Stop! He screamed in his head. Legs, stop moving! He tried to force his muscles to lock up, to fall to the ground. But the thrumming energy that now saturated his being wouldn't allow it. It was a current, and he was caught in it. Any attempt to resist only resulted in a chaotic change of direction. He squeezed his eyes shut, a torrent of unintelligible, terrified noises escaping his lips. When he dared to open them again, the scenery had changed completely. The familiar, dense urban landscape of his neighborhood was gone. He was on the edge of the city, in a district he barely recognized. Warehouses and industrial parks. He had traveled at least a mile, maybe more, in a chaotic, terrifying journey that had lasted no more than 5 or 6 seconds. He was breathing heavily, but it was the panicked, shallow breathing of terror, not exertion. Physically, he felt fine. More than fine. He felt charged, electric. The burning in his muscles he would have expected from such a sprint wasn't there. There was only the hum, the vibration, the awful, unceasing energy. And he was still moving. The frantic, explosive sprinting had subsided into something more terrifying, an involuntary brisk walk. His legs just kept going. Left, right, a steady, metronomic pace that was faster than any normal person could maintain for more than a few minutes. He tried to plant his feet. It was like trying to stop a moving car by grabbing the bumper. The momentum flowed through him, forcing him forward. He looked around wildly. He was heading away from the city center. Away from home. No, he whimpered. He had to turn back. He tried to pivot, to force his body to make a 180-degree turn. The effort was immense. It was like trying to turn a speedboat at full throttle. He leaned hard, digging the edges of his sneakers into the asphalt. He didn't turn so much as bank, carving a wide, slow arc across the 4-lane road. Horns blared again, the sound distorted and stretched, like a recording played at half speed. He was facing the right way now, but the city skyline, with the distinctive UA building in the distance, was already farther away than it should have been. Every step, every single, unstoppable step, was taking him away from it. My phone. The thought cut through the panic. He could call his mom. He could call for help. He fumbled with his backpack, his fingers moving with a clumsy, unnatural speed. He almost ripped the zipper off its track. He plunged his hand inside, his fingers buzzing against the fabric, and pulled out his phone. The screen was a blur. His own perception of time was so accelerated that the refresh rate of the LCD screen was visible, each frame painting itself slowly down the display. He had to force himself to concentrate, to still his mind even as his body refused to. He navigated to his contacts, his thumb tapping too hard, too fast. He overshot his mom's contact twice before managing to land on it. He pressed the call button. The phone buzzed in his hand, the vibrations mingling with the deeper thrum that was now his natural state. It rang. Once. Twice. Izuku? His mother's voice. It was the most beautiful, most grounding sound in the universe. It was also warped, the syllables drawn out as if she was speaking through water. Mom, he choked out. His own voice sounded wrong, a high-pitched, rapid-fire buzz. Mom, something's wrong. Izuku? Honey, where are you? It's pouring rain and the news. Izuku, I was so worried. Are you okay? Your voice sounds strange. I don't know. He cried, the words tumbling out of him in a frantic rush. He was jogging now, the unstoppable pace having picked up. The warehouses were giving way to suburban sprawl. There was lightning. I can't stop. Mom, I can't stop moving. What are you talking about, sweetie? Slow down. I can barely understand you. Are you hurt? Should I call a hospi? The word was cut off by a burst of static. A harsh, crackling sound. Zuku? And you here? Mom? Mom, I'm still here. He yelled into the phone. The screen flashed, call failed. He looked at the top corner. The signal bars were gone. He spun around, his heart sinking into his stomach. In the distance, half a mile behind him and shrinking with every second, was the cell tower he must have just passed. He had literally outrun the signal's range in the middle of a sentence. He tried to call back. No service. The phone slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering onto the asphalt. He tried to stop to pick it up, but his legs wouldn't obey. He could only watch, horrified, as it receded behind him, a tiny, dark rectangle on the wet road, a lost connection to the only person who mattered. No! The scream was ripped from his lungs, a raw sound of pure anguish. He looked back towards Muzidafu. The city lights were beginning to bloom in the twilight, a warm, inviting constellation of familiarity and home. It was a promise of safety, of his small apartment, of his mother's warm katsudan, of his all-might-themed bedroom. It was everything he had ever known, and it was getting smaller. With every single, godforsaken step his body forced him to take, it was shrinking. The unstoppable jog was smoothing out, his strides becoming longer, more efficient. The energy inside him wasn't chaotic anymore. It was settling in, finding a rhythm. A terrible, relentless rhythm. He was on a highway now, the kind that bypassed cities. The cars that passed him seemed to crawl, their headlights cutting lazy swathes through the gloom. The people inside were like mannequins, frozen in place. He was moving faster than them, a lone boy jogging on the shoulder of a major expressway as dusk bled across the sky. He was crying again, but the tears didn't fall. The wind of his own passage, a constant gale created by his unending motion, wicked them away from his eyes the moment they formed, a salty, invisible steam. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the churning clouds in hues of orange and blood red. The longest second of his life, the one where the lightning had struck, had stretched into an eternity of running. He was alone, miles from home, propelled forward by a power he didn't want and couldn't control. He looked back one last time. Muzidafu was no longer a city. It was just a faint, trembling glow on the horizon, a dying ember of a life that was no longer his. His legs kept moving, carrying him farther and farther into the encroaching darkness. He was a prisoner in his own body, and his sentence was to run, forever, away from everything he had ever loved. The life he knew was already a blur in the distance, and he was getting faster. The sun rose for the second time. Izuku didn't see it as a sunrise. In his new, accelerated reality, it was a slow, agonizing bleed of light that crawled over the horizon, pushing back the oppressive darkness of a night spent in perpetual motion. He had watched the entire celestial ballet in excruciating detail, every star tracing its lazy arc, the moon inching across the sky like a snail on black velvet. There was no beauty in it. It was just another indicator of the passage of a time he could no longer properly inhabit. 24 hours. A full day and night had passed since the crimson lightning had rewritten his existence. He was somewhere in the Aichi prefecture now, having long since left the Kanto region behind. He'd run the length of the Tomei Expressway, a phantom on the shoulder of the road, a flicker of motion that drivers would later dismiss as a trick of the light or a symptom of highway hypnosis. He hadn't stopped. He hadn't slept. He hadn't rested for a single second. The Speed Force, the name his comic book-addled brain had tentatively assigned the energy thrumming in his veins, was a cruel miracle. It sustained him. His muscles, which should have been screaming masses of torn tissue and lactic acid, felt perfectly fine. His lungs, which should have been burning, drew breath with an unnatural ease. The energy that forced him to run also fueled the engine, a perpetual motion machine of flesh and bone. But it offered no rest for his mind. His thoughts were a fizzing, over-caffeinated static, a frantic scramble to process a world that had become fundamentally alien. He was a ghost haunting a photograph of the world. That was the only way he could describe it. Everything not touched by his impossible speed was locked in a state of profound lethargy. The raindrops from last night's storm, and the new one that had started an hour ago, didn't fall. They hung in the air like billions of tiny crystal beads strung on an invisible, cosmic thread. When his motion displaced the air, they would drift sideways with a dreamlike grace. People were the most unsettling. They were statues. Flesh and fabric mannequins frozen mid-gesture. A woman in a stopped car, her mouth open in a silent laugh, her hand forever raised to push back a strand of hair. A truck driver, his face a mask of boredom, a plume of cigarette smoke hanging motionless in front of his lips. Izuku could run circles around them, study the logos on their clothes, count the wrinkles around their eyes. He was an invisible god walking among a frozen populace, and the loneliness of it was a physical ache, a cold, hard knot in the center of his chest. Sound was just as distorted. It was a low, constant drone, the auditory equivalent of smearing wet paint. The roar of traffic was a thick, molasses-like hum. The sharp report of a car backfiring became a drawn-out, guttural woof. Birdsong was a series of discordant, slow-motion chirps that sounded more like whale calls. It was a world stripped of its cadence, its rhythm, its life. He had tried, in the early hours of his flight, to interact. He had waved a hand in front of a businessman's face, hoping for a flicker of recognition, a sign that he was still there. But to the man, Izuku's hand would have been less than a blur. It would have been a momentary change in air pressure, a flicker of shadow too fast for the human eye to register or the brain to process. He was less than a ghost. He was a glitch in the simulation. The constant vibration that had started in the underpass had now become his baseline state of being. It was a low-level hum that resonated from his bones outward. It was the source of his motion, the engine that would not stop. He was beginning to understand that his body was constantly vibrating at a superhuman frequency, and it was this that kept him perpetually out of sync with the rest of the world. This new reality came with a host of new, terrifying problems. Basic survival had become a complex and often destructive puzzle. The first was thirst. Hours ago, his throat had felt like sandpaper. He'd seen a roadside rest stop, a sanctuary of vending machines and water fountains. He'd veered off the highway, his jog carrying him across the parking lot in 2 strides. He'd leaned down towards the spigot of a water fountain, his mind screaming for relief. But as his face approached the stream of water, the sheer velocity of his movement created a cushion of compressed air. The water sprayed violently away from him, a fine mist that couldn't even touch his lips. He tried again, faster, slower, it didn't matter. It was like trying to drink from a fire hose aimed directly at his face. Defeated, he had seen a puddle of rainwater and, in a moment of sheer desperation, had tried to cup it in his hands. The result was the same. The water scattered into 1,000 droplets before his skin could make contact. Hunger was a far more violent affair. The energy sustained him, but a deep, primal hunger still gnawed at his belly, a psychological echo of a need his body might no longer have. He remembered the layout of a convenience store from his journey. He saw one ahead, a bright beacon of fluorescent light in the gray morning. This time, he would be careful. He had to be. He forced himself to slow down, fighting the momentum. It was like trying to walk through thick, setting tar. His muscles screamed in protest, not from fatigue, but from the strain of resistance. He managed to get his speed down to what felt like a frantic, blurry walk. To an outside observer, he would still be a nearly invisible streak. He phased through the automatic glass door by accident, the sensation a now familiar cold, buzzing nothingness that made his teeth ache. He was inside. The store was a frozen tableau. A clerk stood behind the counter, hand outstretched to take money from a customer. A child was pointing at a rack of candy, their face a perfect O of desire. Izuku's eyes locked on his prize, a shelf of onigiri, the simple rice balls a staple of his diet. He focused, his entire being concentrating on the simple act of picking one up. He extended his hand, moving it with painstaking, deliberate slowness. He saw his fingers, shimmering at the edges, approach the plastic-wrapped triangle of rice and seaweed. The instant his fingertips made contact, physics asserted its dominance with brutal prejudice. The molecular friction of his vibrating fingers against the stationary object was immense. The plastic wrapper didn't just tear, it flash vaporized. The rice ball itself didn't crumble, it detonated. There was a soft foom and a small cloud of superheated steam, and cooked rice grains puffed into existence. The force of it knocked the other onigiri off the shelf. Izuku stared at his empty, buzzing hand. A few blackened grains of rice were stuck to his skin. He had tried to eat, and in doing so, had created a miniature food bomb. The sheer destructive potential of his new state slammed into him. What if he tried to touch a person? To shake their hand? To hug his mother? The image of her turning to ash and steam at his touch flashed through his mind, and a wave of nausea so profound it almost buckled his knees washed over him. But his legs kept moving, churning in place, carrying him on a tiny, frantic loop around the snack aisle. He fled the store, a trail of displaced air and quiet chaos in his wake. He was a menace. A danger. A walking disaster area. He sought refuge from the roads, from the frozen people, from the temptations of a world he could no longer touch. He veered into a dense forest that ran parallel to the highway. Here, at least, the statues were made of wood and leaf. The slow-motion world was less jarring when applied to the ancient stillness of nature. He ran, his feet barely touching the mulchy ground. It was easier here. The uneven terrain gave him something to focus on, a puzzle to solve with every stride. He leaped over fallen logs, ducked under low-hanging branches, his body executing the complex parkour with an instinct he didn't know he possessed. The speed force was more than just running. It was a form of precognition, an intuitive understanding of physics and trajectory that allowed him to navigate the world at a speed his brain couldn't consciously pilot. But his mind was fraying. 24 hours without rest, without human contact, without a single moment of stillness, was taking its toll. The constant sensory input, the endless stream of slow-motion images, the distorted drone of the world. It was like being trapped in the world's most boring and horrifying experimental film. His concentration, which had been razor-sharp out of sheer terror, was beginning to waver. That's when he made the mistake. His mind drifted, just for a nanosecond, to his mother's face. To All Might's hollowed-out cheeks. To Bakugo's sneer. He was back on the rooftop, in the underpass, anywhere but here. And in that nanosecond of inattention, he failed to see the ancient, gnarled oak tree directly in his path. By the time his focus snapped back, it was too late. The tree was a colossal, unmoving wall of bark and wood, mere feet in front of him. There was no time to swerve. No time to leap. He instinctively braced for an impact that would surely turn his bones to powder. He squeezed his eyes shut, and a guttural scream of pure terror tore from his throat. The impact never came. Instead, there was a plunge. A sudden, shocking cold that seemed to leach all the warmth from his body. The roar of the wind in his ears was replaced by a deep, sonorous hum, like a giant cello string being bowed. The world went dark, the smell of damp earth and chlorophyll filling his senses. He felt disembodied. He could feel the tree around him, not as a solid object, but as a dense field of slow, green, living energy. He was inside it. Then, just as suddenly as it began, he was out the other side, stumbling back into the muted light of the forest. He tripped, his unstoppable momentum sending him tumbling head over heels. He rolled to a stop and immediately shot back to his feet, his legs already trying to jog away. He whipped his head around. The oak tree stood there, unharmed. Not a scratch. Not a splinter. He looked at his own body. He was fine. He had passed through a solid object. The memory of clipping the corner of the building yesterday flashed in his mind. He hadn't just clipped it, he had phased through it. The same buzzing, tingling sensation. It was the vibration, his constant, high-frequency vibration. He had done it by accident. But he had done it, for the first time since the lightning strike. A sliver of something other than terror entered his heart. It wasn't hope, not yet. It was curiosity, a desperate, scientific curiosity that had been the hallmark of his hero analysis. He had a new power. A terrifying, cursed power. But it had rules. And if it had rules, it could be understood. Maybe, just maybe, it could be controlled. The thought was a tiny flicker of light in an ocean of darkness. It was enough. Night fell again. The second sunset was no more beautiful than the first. He was driven by a desperate need, a need that overrode his fear of causing destruction, the need for information. He had to know what the world was saying about him. He had to know if they were looking for him. He had to see his mother. He found a small town nestled in a valley, a cluster of lights that seemed impossibly peaceful from a distance. He slowed his pace again, the strain immense. He moved through the deserted streets like a whisper, the world around him locked in the deep stillness of 2 a.m. He saw it from a block away, the cool, blue-white glow of television screens in an electronics shop window. A dozen different news channels, sports games, and dramas played out in hypnotic silence. He stopped across the street, his body humming, his legs wanting to bolt. He forced himself to stay, anchoring his gaze on the screens. Most were playing late-night reruns. But one, a national news network, held his attention. The churn at the bottom of the screen read, "Unprecedented atmospheric phenomenon baffles scientists." They showed satellite imagery. A heat map of Japan with a strange, moving thermal signature streaking down its length. "Experts are at a loss to explain the phenomenon," a stern-faced anchorwoman said, her voice a slow, deep baritone in Izuku's perception, which has been described by eyewitnesses as a ripple in the air or a green-tinted heat haze moving at impossible speeds. Izuku's breath hitched. That was him. He was the atmospheric phenomenon. The screen changed to grainy footage from a highway traffic camera. This footage, captured early yesterday evening on the Tomei Expressway, shows the only known visual of the object. He leaned closer, his face inches from the storefront glass. He saw the cars crawling along. And then he saw it. A flicker. A distortion that zipped past the camera in less than 3 frames. A faint, greenish-black blur. If you blinked, you'd miss it. That was all that was left of him. A smudge on a security tape. And in what authorities are now suggesting may be a related story, the anchorwoman continued, her tone shifting to one of practiced solemnity. A 15-year-old boy from the Muzutafu district has been reported missing. Izuku's heart stopped. Not literally, but the emotional shock was so great it felt like it had. His school photo filled the screen. His own goofy, hopeful, freckled face, staring out at his future, ghostly self. The name below it, Izuku Midoriya. The 2 stories, the impossible phenomenon and the missing boy, were now one. His secret was out. Or at least, the pieces were on the table for the world to see. Then the camera cut to a press conference. And he saw her. Inko Midoriya stood at a podium, flanked by police officers. She was a ghost of a different sort. The vibrant, loving woman he knew had been hollowed out, her face pale and drawn, her eyes swollen and red-rimmed. She looked smaller, as if the grief were physically compressing her. She gripped the sides of the podium, her knuckles white, as if it were the only thing holding her upright. When she spoke, her voice was a fragile, trembling thing, stretched and warped by Izuku's perception, but the agony within it was crystal clear. "My son, Izuku," she began, taking a shuddering breath. "If you can see this, if you're out there and you're scared, please, just come home. Whatever has happened, we can fix it. Just please, I need to know you're safe." A tear traced a slow path down her cheek. It seemed to take an eternity to fall. "He's a good boy," she whispered, her voice cracking, the words aimed not at the reporters, but at the world, a mother's desperate plea. "He's my good boy. Please, help me find my son." A tsunami of guilt, so powerful and absolute it felt like a physical blow, slammed into Izuku. He was the cause of that pain. His face, his name, his cursed power, it was all torturing her. He had not only lost his life, he had shattered hers. He sank to his knees on the wet pavement, a choked, guttural sob escaping his lips. But there was no release. His legs, slaves to the relentless engine inside him, immediately began to move, pumping up and down, drumming a frantic, meaningless rhythm against the asphalt. He was trapped, kneeling but running, weeping but unable to find the release of collapse. He was a prisoner forced to exercise in his own cell of grief. Through his tears, his gaze drifted to the background of the press conference shot. On a shelf in the police station behind his mother, placed there for some reason he couldn't fathom, was a small, limited edition Silver Age All Might figurine. It was the same one she had bought him for his 10th birthday. All Might. The man who had crushed his dream. The man whose figurine now stood silent witness to the nightmare that dream had become. The irony was a scalding, bitter acid in his soul. He had to get away. He scrambled to his feet and fled, a silent, weeping streak of green and black, leaving the little town, and the image of his mother's broken face behind him. In a secure, subterranean office deep beneath the heart of Tokyo, Toshinori Yagi, known to the world as All Might, stared at a similar screen. The taste of bitter coffee did nothing to wash away the feeling of guilt curdling in his stomach. The timeline is undeniable, Detective Naomasa Tsukachi said, his voice calm and factual as always. He pointed a pen at a large monitor displaying a complex chronological chart. 1532, Sludge Villain Incident in Muzurifu. You apprehend the villain. 1610, you have a documented encounter with the boy, Izuku Midoriya, on a rooftop nearby. 1625, you leave the scene. 1705, a massive, anomalous energy discharge is recorded at an electrical substation 1.3 kilometers from the boy's known route home. Power grid reports a surge consistent with a multi-gigawatt lightning strike, yet meteorological records show no such storm cell. Taishinori leaned forward, his skeletal frame looking frail under the harsh office lights. And the boy? He never made it home, Tsukachi said, his human lie detector quirk telling him what he already knew. Every word out of Taishinori's mouth was heavy with the truth of his regret. His mother placed the first call to authorities at 1830. At 1709, from minutes after the energy spike, the first sighting of the atmospheric phenomenon was logged by a highway patrol car 30 kilometers west of Muzurifu, heading away from the city at an estimated speed of over 300 kilometers per hour. Tsukachi tapped another screen, bringing up the energy signature analysis. And this is the clincher. The energy from that lightning was exotic. Our analysts are calling it extra-dimensional. It doesn't match any known quark energy signature, nor any natural event. But the trace resonance left behind? It's all over the highway sightings. Whatever that energy was, it didn't just hit the transformer. It hit the boy. And now, the boy is the phenomenon. Taishinori sagged in his chair, running a hand over his gaunt face. He remembered the boy's eyes. They were filled with such desperate, heartbreaking hope, even after he had tried so carefully to extinguish it. He had told the boy to be realistic. He had left him alone on that rooftop, his spirit in tatters. And then, minutes later, the universe had played a cosmic joke of unspeakable cruelty. It had given the quirkless boy a power beyond imagination, and in the same stroke, had turned it into a prison. So he got a quirk, Taishinori murmured, the words feeling like ash in his mouth. He finally got one. It seems so, Tsukachi said gently. A transportation quirk of unprecedented power, and, it would appear, zero control. Taishinori stood up, a fire rekindling in his sunken eyes. The guilt was still there, a cold, hard stone in his gut. But now, it was being forged into something else. Responsibility. Resolve. It wasn't a disappearance, All Might said, his voice regaining a fraction of its familiar power. It was an origin story. A terrible one. He had failed young Midoriya on that rooftop. He had offered him pragmatism when what the boy had needed was a lifeline. He had seen a fragile dream and, in the name of safety, had helped to break it. He would not fail him again. Find him, Naomasa, he commanded, turning to face his friend, the symbol of peace shining through the emaciated form. Use every resource we have. Satellites, hero networks, energy detectors. I don't care what it costs. We need to predict his path, get ahead of him. I have to talk to him. I have to let him know he's not just some phenomenon. He's a boy, and he's not alone. Tsukachi gave a single, firm nod. I'm already on it. As the detective turned to his work, All Might looked back at the screen, at the blurry image of the green streak on the highway. He saw not a monster or a mystery, but a terrified child, running from a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. Hold on, young man, he whispered to the screen, a promise echoing in the sterile room. Help is coming. 3 weeks, 21 rotations of a planet he was no longer truly standing on. 504 hours of ceaseless, agonizing motion. Izuku Midoriya had stopped counting the miles. The numbers had become meaningless, astronomical. He had crossed Japan from end to end and was now on his second pass, a frantic, oscillating scribble on a map he could no longer read. The geography of his home country had flattened into a series of textures, the smooth, unforgiving gray of asphalt, the soft, yielding brown of forest floors, the gritty, uneven crunch of coastal gravel. He was no longer just a boy who couldn't stop running. He was an entity, a phenomenon defined by the rules of his curse. The urban legends had followed him, evolving as he went. In the beginning, he was the Kanto comet, a regional mystery. Now, glimpsed in Hokkaido's sparse plains and Kyushu's volcanic fields, he was something more. The Phantom Runner. The Green Glitch. On conspiracy forums, they called him a jumper, an entity that didn't travel between 2 points but simply ceased to exist in one place and reappear in another, the blur between being a trick of the eye. They weren't entirely wrong. His perception had sharpened, adapting to the torrent of information with a terrifying efficiency. He was faster now, much faster. The world of frozen statues had become even more still. He could see the individual dust motes hanging in a sunbeam, each one a tiny, unmoving planet in a silent universe. He could see the stress fractures in a bridge's support pillar as he ran across it, the vibrations of the structure traveling up through his feet and painting a schematic of its integrity in his mind. Most profoundly, he had begun to truly see the speed force. It wasn't a place he went to. It was a dimension he was perpetually running through. When he closed his eyes, a risky maneuver he could only maintain for a fraction of a second, he didn't see darkness. He saw a tunnel. A swirling, chaotic vortex of lightning, the same impossible crimson and brilliant gold that had struck him down. It was beautiful and terrifying, a corridor of pure creation and destruction. The faster he ran, the more solid the walls of this tunnel became, and the more the outside world faded into a muted, gray dream. He was a needle, and the speed force was the thread he was pulling through the fabric of reality. This understanding brought no comfort. It only codified his isolation. He was a resident of a dimension of one, his only companion the ceaseless hum that was the sound of his own existence. The guilt from the news report was a constant, gnawing passenger. The image of his mother's face was seared onto his consciousness, more vivid than the slow-motion world around him. Her tears, falling in agonizing slow motion, were a fresh torment every time he blinked. He had done that to her. His dream of being a hero had always been selfish, he realized now. He had wanted the glory, the recognition, the chance to prove everyone wrong. He never once considered the cost to the person who had always believed in him. Now, that cost was her happiness. Her peace. This guilt became a catalyst, overriding his fear of his own destructive touch. He couldn't go home. He couldn't stop. But he couldn't bear the not knowing, the silence. He had to try again. He had to hear her voice, even if his own could never reach her properly. He began hunting for them. Not convenience stores or towns, but the lonely spires of modern communication. Cell towers. Microwave relays. He saw one silhouetted against the bruised evening sky, a skeletal finger pointing at the heavens from the peak of a remote, forested mountain. It was perfect. Isolated. No one around to get hurt. The journey up the mountain was not a climb. It was a vertical sprint. He didn't follow the winding service road. He went straight up, his feet finding purchase on rocks and roots, his body a green-black blur against the ancient trees. He reached the summit in under a minute, arriving at the fenced-off concrete base of the tower. The fence was no obstacle. He focused, recalling the feeling of passing through the oak tree. He concentrated on the low hum of his own body, the constant vibration that was his new nature. He pushed it, consciously increasing the frequency until his vision shimmered. He took a step, and the chain-link fence passed through him with a faint, cold buzz, like static electricity against his soul. He was at the base of the tower. It hummed with a power he could feel, a different frequency from his own. It was a jumble of overlapping waves, a cacophony of data, voices, and images all stacked on top of each other. He laid a hand on the cool steel lattice. The vibration surged into him, a chaotic flood of information. It was overwhelming, but within the chaos, he could feel the underlying structure, the carrier waves, the broadcast frequencies. His theory was desperate, born from the frantic, analytical part of his mind that still clung to reason. If he could vibrate through solid matter by matching its frequency, perhaps he could interface with electronic signals by matching theirs. He had to tune his body like a radio. He closed his eyes, plunging himself into the vision of the lightning tunnel. He ignored the outside world and focused inward, on the engine that drove him. He began to run in a tight 10-foot circle around the base of the tower, his feet a continuous blur. He wasn't trying to go faster, but to change the quality of his speed. He focused on his personal vibration, the thrumming in his cells. He tried to push it higher, to change its pitch. The sensation was agonizing. It felt like every nerve ending was being scraped with a fine-toothed comb. His teeth chattered violently, and a high-pitched whine escaped his lips, too fast for a normal ear to even register. He had to find the right frequency, the one that would allow him to tap into the stream without being consumed by it. He could feel it, like tuning a guitar string in a hurricane. He pushed past the garbled noise of television broadcasts, the piercing shriek of emergency services bands, the low drone of data streams. He was looking for one thing, the specific frequency band of the public telephone network. He felt a lock. A sudden, jarring resonance, as if two gears had finally clicked into place. The world of sound exploded in his head. It was a billion voices at once. A torrent of conversations, a tidal wave of human connection that he was drowning in. Laughter, arguments, weeping, declarations of love, business deals, idle gossip. It was the entire spectrum of human life, poured directly into his brain. He cried out, stumbling in his circular path, the overload threatening to shatter his sanity. Focus! He screamed at himself. Filter it. Find her. He needed a key. A number. His home number. A string of digits he had known his entire life. He visualized it, held it in his mind like a talisman. He used that number as a tuning fork, sifting through the ocean of noise, looking for the one specific signal path that terminated at that number. He found it. A faint, fragile thread in the tempest. The dial tone. His heart hammered against his ribs. He focused all his energy on that one thread, pushing his own intent along it. He was a phantom signal, a ghost in the machine. He was dialing. It rang. The sound was clear in his mind, a perfect, pure tone amidst the static. It rang once. Twice. On the third ring, the line connected. He didn't hear a hello. He just heard the sound of weeping, a ragged, heartbroken sobbing that was as familiar to him as his own reflection. His mother. She must have been sitting by the phone, waiting, hoping. The sound shattered him. Mom? The word was meant to be a whisper, a gentle reassurance. But it didn't travel through his vocal cords and the air. It traveled as a raw, modulated energy pulse through the network. It came out on her end not as a voice, but as a piercing, high-frequency shriek of static, a digital scream. He heard her gasp on the other end, a sharp intake of breath. Hello? Is someone there? Izuku? She had heard something. She knew. Tears streamed from his eyes, evaporating into the wind of his circular run. Mom, it's me. I'm okay. I'm so sorry, he cried, the words forming in his mind and being converted into more bursts of violent, painful static on her end. He heard a faint whimper of pain through the line, as if the noise was physically hurting her. Then, another sound. A man's voice, gentle but firm. Inko-san, please. The police advised against this. It's likely just another crackpot. It was Tsukachi, the detective. He was with her. A small part of Izuku was relieved she wasn't alone. The rest of him was horrified. They were listening. No, his mother insisted, her voice thick with tears. The timing, just like the other times I've felt. I don't know, a strange feeling. It's him. I know it's him. Izuku, baby, can you hear me? Say something. Anything. He opened his mouth to try again, to force the words out, to do anything. But the connection was too fragile. His own unstable energy, coupled with the sheer distance, was causing the signal to degrade. Her voice began to break up, dissolving into the background noise of the billion other conversations. Ovu, Zuku, please BSA. The thread snapped. The connection was gone. He was left alone again in the roaring silence of his own head, the echo of his mother's weeping the only thing left. He had reached out, and all he had managed to do was cause her more pain, both emotional and likely physical. He had been a screech of static in her ear, a moment of confusion and false hope in her vigil. The despair that washed over him was cold and absolute. He stopped running in a circle and just ran, launching himself from the mountaintop into the dark forest below, a trajectory of pure, thoughtless misery. The single flicker of scientific curiosity he had felt before was extinguished, smothered by a tidal wave of failure. He was a curse. A ghost made of static and grief. And for the first time, he truly, deeply wished the lightning had just killed him. In a sterile, windowless room buried deep in the Hero Public Safety Commission's Tokyo headquarters, the atmosphere was thick with the smell of stale coffee and frustration. A massive, holographic map of Japan dominated one wall, a spiderweb of roads and topography. On it, a single, erratic red line marked the predicted path of the entity now designated High-Velocity Unidentified Mover, or HVM. Toshinori Yagi watched the map, his face a grim mask. For 3 weeks, they had been one step behind. They would predict a path based on energy readings and satellite data, dispatch a hero team, and arrive only to find a lingering ozone smell and a few disturbed leaves. Trying to catch young Midoriya was like trying to catch a specific gust of wind. "He's accelerating," Detective Tsukachi stated, his voice flat. He pointed to a series of graphs on a nearby monitor. "His average velocity has increased by nearly 40% in the last week. At this rate, he'll be breaking Mach 2 on open ground by the end of the month. We can't intercept. No hero is fast enough, and any attempt to blockade him would be suicide for the personnel involved and would likely send him careening off into a populated area." "And the boy's mother?" Toshinori asked, his voice low. Tsukachi sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "She's resilient. But she's unraveling. She refuses to leave her apartment, refuses to stop answering the phone, says she gets feelings when he's trying to reach out. Tonight she swore she heard something on the line, a burst of static. We traced it. There was a massive, unexplainable power surge at a microwave relay in the Akaishi Mountains that coincided with her call." Toshinori's heart clenched. The boy was trying to make contact. He was still in there, still trying to reach home. "He's getting more desperate," Toshinori said. "And more powerful. A combination that will lead to tragedy if we don't intervene." "But how?" A new voice cut in. "We are trying to communicate with a man who perceives a bullet as a slow-moving paperweight. A standard radio broadcast would be, to him, a single, incomprehensible drone lasting for weeks. It's a problem not of volume, but of temporal bandwidth." The speaker was Dr. Eris Thorne, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch the skin at her temples. She was a civilian specialist, a leading mind in wave mechanics and their interaction with quirks. The government had brought her in a week ago, when the problem had shifted from a law enforcement issue to a physics nightmare. "We can't talk to him in our time," she continued, gesturing to a complex waveform on her screen. "We have to send a message that can be understood in his." A spark ignited in Toshinori's mind. He straightened up, the weariness in his posture momentarily vanishing. "You're saying it's possible?" "Theoretically," Dr. Thorne said, a glint in her eye. "It's not about the message itself, but the delivery system. We can't just send words. We have to send a compressed data packet. We take a vocal message, digitize it, and then accelerate its playback speed 10,000-fold. But that's the easy part. The hard part is modulating it onto a carrier wave that resonates with his specific biological energy signature. We'd have to hijack the emergency broadcast system, piggyback our signal on its nationwide reach, and pulse it at a frequency that his accelerated brain might perceive not as sound, but as a discernible pattern in the static of his existence." "A voice in the static," Tsukachi murmured, understanding. "Precisely," Thorne confirmed. "It's a shot in the dark. A message in a bottle thrown into a hurricane. But it's the only shot we have." Toshinori looked from the doctor's determined face to the lonely red line on the map. It was a crazy, desperate plan. It was perfect. "Do it," he said, his voice imbued with the authority of All Might. "Everything you need. Full access to the EBS. Whatever it takes. And I will be the one to deliver the message." He knew what he had to say. It wouldn't be the booming, confident voice of the symbol of peace. That was the voice that had failed the boy. It would be the voice of a man who understood what it meant to be broken, to be trapped by a power that was also a curse. The voice of Toshinori Yagi. He was in a place beyond despair. A gray, empty wasteland where emotion was a luxury he could no longer afford. After the failed call, he had run blindly, his mind a maelstrom of self-hatred. Now, days later, he was simply empty. He was running through the Aokigahara, the infamous sea of trees at the base of Mount Fuji. The dense canopy blocked out the sun, plunging the forest floor into a perpetual twilight. The world here was even more still, more silent. The air was heavy, and the ground was soft with moss, muffling the sound of his own passage. It was a place where people came to end their lives, and Izuku felt a grim kinship with the profound sorrow that seemed to soak the very soil. He was not here to die, because he couldn't. He was just here because it felt like the world's most appropriate treadmill. He was just a machine now. Left, right, left, right. The rhythm of his feet was the rhythm of his world. The hum of his body was the only music. The crimson tunnel of the speed force flickered at the edges of his vision, a constant reminder of his prison. He was giving up. The part of him that analyzed, that hoped, that fought, was finally going quiet. There was only the running. And then, something changed. It wasn't a sound. It was a disruption in the hum. A new vibration, from an external source, that resonated with the frequency of his own body. It was faint at first, a rhythmic pulse that cut through the monotonous drone of his existence. It was a pattern in the chaos. He slowed, not consciously, but because his entire being was focused on this new sensation. The pulse grew stronger, clearer. It was coming from everywhere at once, carried on the very air itself. And then, within the pulse, there was a voice. It was warped, compressed, and impossibly fast, but his mind, now accustomed to processing information at incredible speeds, could understand it. It was like hearing a familiar song played on a strange, new instrument. Young man. The voice was quiet, raspy. It was not the booming laugh of All Might. It was the tired, strained voice of the skeletal man on the rooftop. Izuku stumbled, his stride breaking for the first time in days. He came to a halt, not a complete stop, but a frantic, vibrating stillness, his legs turning in place as he stood rooted to the mossy ground. He looked around wildly, at the silent, watching trees. If you can hear me. The voice was in his head, in his bones. It was a beacon in his self-imposed darkness. It was real. Someone was talking to him. Someone had found him. I know you're scared. But you are not alone. The words were simple. They were everything. They were a hand reaching through the wall of his prison, a thread of connection thrown across the vast, lonely expanse of his sped-up reality. He wasn't just a phenomenon. He wasn't just a ghost. He was a young man. He was scared. He was seen, a single, hot tear welled in his eye. This time, it did not evaporate. In the relative stillness of his vibrating halt, it traced a slow, clean path through the grime on his cheek and dripped onto a patch of moss below. It was the first tear he had shed that felt real in weeks. The broadcast continued, the modulated voice a lifeline. I want to help. Hope. It was a fragile, unfamiliar feeling, a tiny seedling pushing its way through the cracked, barren earth of his soul. He didn't know how. He didn't know what it meant, but for the first time since the world had dissolved into a blur, Izuku Midoriya felt the faintest, most profound flicker of a reason to keep running. Not away, but towards. Towards the voice in the static. The voice was his compass. For 3 days Izuku ran with a purpose that was not his own. The modulated, high-speed broadcast from All Might, or rather, Toshinori Yagi, as the voice was unmistakably that of the man behind the smile, became his guide through the labyrinth of his own speed. The messages were short, precise, and repeated on a loop that was timed to his accelerated perception. They were patterns of comfort in the static, each one a breadcrumb leading him out of the wilderness of his despair. Head north. Towards the Japanese Alps. We have a safe place for you. Avoid major population centers. Follow the river valleys. We are tracking your progress. You are doing well, young man. There is someone waiting for you. Someone who understands. That last message resonated with him the most. Someone who understands. The idea was so foreign, so impossible, that it bordered on fantasy. How could anyone understand this life lived between the ticks of a clock? This prison of perpetual motion? Yet, the sincerity in Toshinori's voice, a gravelly tone heavy with a burden he was only just beginning to comprehend, made him believe. It was a fragile, desperate belief, but it was enough to keep his feet moving in the right direction. He left the Aokigahara behind, the oppressive sorrow of the forest giving way to the rolling foothills of the Alps. The terrain grew steeper, more challenging. He was a streak of green and black ascending into the clouds, a silent pilgrim on a journey towards an unknown sanctuary. The air grew thinner, colder. Patches of snow began to appear, frozen solid in his perception, their crystalline structures as intricate and perfect as jewels. The final instruction led him to a place that felt like it existed outside of time itself. Nestled high in a secluded, almost inaccessible mountain cirque was a temple. It wasn't a grand, brightly colored tourist destination. It was ancient, humble, and seemed to have grown out of the mountain itself. Its dark, weathered wood blended with the gray rock, its gracefully curved roofs holding mantles of pristine snow. A single, stone torii gate, covered in moss and etched with characters faded by centuries of wind and ice, marked the entrance. The air here was utterly still, the silence so profound that it seemed to absorb the constant hum of his own body. As he passed under the torii gate, a new vibration met him. It wasn't the chaotic energy of a city, or the raw power of a communications tower. It was a calm, focused, and deeply powerful aura of tranquility. It was the feeling of a placid lake, of a mountain that had stood for millennia. For the first time, the energy of a place seemed to soothe the frantic buzzing of the speed force within him, rather than clash with it. He came to a stop, his version of a stop, a vibrating, humming standstill, in the center of a raked gravel courtyard. Every pebble was arranged in a perfect, swirling pattern around a single, massive boulder. He had the distinct feeling he was being watched. From the dark interior of the main temple building, a figure emerged. He was old. Incredibly old. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, a testament to a long life, yet his eyes were sharp and clear, missing the filmy quality of advanced age. He was bald, with a fringe of wispy white hair around his ears, and he wore the simple, gray robes of a monk. He was leaning on a gnarled wooden staff, but it seemed more for balance than for support. The tranquility Izuku had felt entering the temple grounds emanated from this man in focused, palpable waves. The old man looked directly at Izuku. And he didn't flinch. He didn't squint as if trying to see a blur. His gaze was steady, calm, and unnervingly direct, as if he could see the terrified boy inside the vibrating distortion. So, the man said, his voice a low, gentle rumble that seemed perfectly timed to Izuku's perception, each syllable clear and deliberate. You are the little storm. Tashinori-san was not exaggerating. Izuku stared, dumbfounded. The man was speaking at a normal pace, yet he could understand him perfectly. It wasn't like the compressed broadcasts. It was as if the man's words existed in both normal time and his own accelerated reality simultaneously. You are wondering how I can speak to you, the old man continued, a faint, knowing smile gracing his lips. He tapped his temple with a gnarled finger. My quirk is a simple one. I perceive patterns. In the wind, in the flow of water, in the growth of a tree. In the frantic energy that surrounds you. Your vibration is a pattern, child. A very loud, very chaotic one. But a pattern nonetheless. I am merely matching my speech to its rhythm. Izuku's jaw, which he hadn't realized was hanging open, snapped shut. This was the person All Might had sent him to. The one who understands. My name is Hattori Hanzo, the old man said, giving a slight bow. My hero name many years ago was Velocity, a rather grandiose title for a man whose quirk only allowed him to trip over his own feet 3 times before he could think to stop. He said it with a wry, self-deprecating humor. Izuku could feel the truth in it. This man wasn't a speedster on his level, not even close. But he had tasted the curse of uncontrollable momentum. He had felt the world blur around him. He understood the fundamental horror of being a passenger in your own body. Come, Hattori said, turning and gesturing with his staff towards the temple interior. The wind is cold, and you have been running for a very long time. It is time you learned to rest. Rest. The word was a foreign concept, a memory from another life. Izuku followed, a vibrating, humming shadow trailing the calm, deliberate steps of the old monk. The inside of the temple was a world of dark wood, worn tatami mats, and the faint, clean scent of old incense and pine. It was sparse, minimalist, containing only what was necessary. It was a physical manifestation of the tranquility that Hattori exuded. Hattori led him to a large, open chamber with polished wooden floors. The walls were paper screens, painted with scenes of mountains and clouds in faded ink. In the center of the room was a single, round cushion. "Your problem, child," Hattori began, his voice echoing slightly in the stillness of the room, "is not in your legs. It is here." He tapped his head again. "You are trying to control the flood by building a dam with pebbles. You try to stop your body, to fight the current. You will always lose this fight. The speed force, as Toshinori-san called it, is an ocean. You are but a drop of water within it. You cannot command the ocean to be still." He gestured to the cushion. "You must learn to still your mind. You must learn to float. To become the eye of your own storm." Izuku looked from the cushion to his own vibrating legs. I can't," he stammered, the words coming out as a high-speed buzz that Hattori seemed to understand perfectly. "I can't sit still. I can't meditate. I can't stop." "I did not tell you to stop," Hattori said patiently. "I told you to rest. There is a difference. Your body runs. Let it. For now, it is as natural to you as breathing. But your mind can be taught a different kind of pace. This will be your first lesson, perception over control." He guided Izuku not to the cushion, but to the edge of the large chamber. "This room is your training ground for now. It is approximately 20 meters across. You will run. You will run in a circle around the cushion. You will not try to slow down. You will not try to stop. You will simply run. And as you run, you will focus on one thing." He walked to a bookshelf in the corner, a dusty, ancient thing filled with scrolls and thick, hand-bound books. He pulled one out. It was a collection of classic poetry. "You will focus on this," he said, opening the book. "I will place it on a stand in the center. Every time you pass it, you will read one character. Not a word, not a line. One single character. You will not memorize it. You will simply perceive it, acknowledge it, and let it go. Your body will run in a circle. Your eyes will read a line. Your mind will learn to separate the two." It seemed absurd. Impossible. How could he focus on a single, tiny character when his entire world was a high-velocity blur? "The flood of information your brain is receiving is drowning you," Hattori explained, as if reading his thoughts. "You are trying to process everything at once. The movement of your feet, the sight of the walls, the sound of the wind. It is too much. This exercise will teach you to filter, to pluck one single, meaningful piece of data from the torrent. You will learn to see the world not as a blur, but as a series of infinite, individual moments. And in those moments, you will find stillness." Izuku was skeptical, but the calm authority in the old master's voice was absolute. And what other choice did he have? He nodded, a sharp, vibrating gesture. Hattori placed the book of poetry on a low wooden stand atop the central cushion. He opened it to the first page. "Begin," he said, and retreated to the side of the room, seating himself in a meditative posture. Izuku took a breath he didn't need and started to run. It was a nightmare. His natural speed in the enclosed space was terrifying. He was a particle in an accelerator, a green-black streak tracing a circle on the polished floor. The room was a dizzying, wooden cyclone. The book in the center was a smear of white and black. He couldn't even tell it was a book. "Focus," he commanded himself, echoing Hattori's lesson. Perception over control. He forced his eyes to lock onto the center of the room as he ran. Lap after lap, the dizzying spin of the walls began to fade into his peripheral vision. He focused only on the blur in the middle. He tried to time his perception, to take a mental snapshot at the exact moment he passed the book. For the first hour, he saw nothing. Just a smear. His frustration grew, a hot, familiar feeling. This was pointless. He was a freak, a broken machine. This gentle, philosophical approach was useless against the raw, chaotic power that had claimed him. "Your anger is a frantic splashing," Hattori's voice cut through his thoughts, calm and even. "It only churns the water, making it harder to see. Let the frustration go. Observe it, and release it. Return to the character." Izuku gritted his teeth, the vibration in his jaw intensifying. He let out a frustrated, high-pitched noise and forced himself to obey. He let the anger go, not by suppressing it, but by acknowledging it and then turning his focus back to the task. He ran for another hour. Then another. The sun, a slow-moving bar of light, crawled across the paper walls of the dojo. And then, for the first time, he saw it. It was there for less than a nanosecond, a fleeting imprint on his retina. A single, black, elegant brushstroke. The character for River. It was as clear and perfect as if it were the only thing in the universe. He gasped, his rhythm faltering for a split second. He had done it. He had plucked a single, coherent piece of information from the storm. A slow smile spread across his face. He focused again, his determination renewed. On the next lap, he caught the next character, mountain. Then moon. Then flower. Character by character, lap by lap, he was reading. He ran for what must have been 12 straight hours. His body was on autopilot, a perfect, tireless machine. But his mind was engaged in the most strenuous exercise of its life. He learned to anticipate the turn, to angle his head just so. The world outside his circular path became a muted, unimportant background hum. His entire universe shrank to the 20-meter circle and the single line of poetry unfolding before him, one character at a time. He was no longer just running. He was processing. He was filtering. He was, in a strange, kinetic way, meditating. As he finished the last character on the page, he instinctively slowed. Not by fighting the momentum, but by letting it go. He didn't try to brake. He simply withdrew the intent to run, and his body, for the first time, responded. He coasted, the circle of his path widening until he came to a gentle, vibrating stop near the wall. His legs still hummed, still shifted from foot to foot, but the frantic, compulsory dashing was gone. He was standing, more or less still. He looked up, breathing heavily from the mental exertion. Hattori was watching him, the same calm, knowing smile on his face. Good, the old master said simply. The water begins to settle. Tomorrow, we will read the entire library. The days that followed blurred into a routine of impossible learning. The training ground expanded from the small dojo to a vast, bowl-shaped valley behind the temple, a natural amphitheater carved by an ancient glacier. Here, Izuku could truly run, tracing a miles-long loop around the valley floor. Hattori's methods were unorthodox, bordering on insane, but they were all built on the same core principle: teach the mind to operate at the speed of the body. The library came first. Hattori would lay out dozens of ancient, priceless scrolls. Izuku's task was to run past them, absorbing entire pages of philosophy, history, and strategy in a single glance. At first, it was a jumble of characters. But he applied the principle of the single character, expanding it. He learned to see not just letters, but words, then sentences, then entire paragraphs in those fleeting moments. His mind became a supercomputer, his eyes the scanners, processing and storing information at a rate that would have seemed like a godlike power to anyone else. He consumed the entire temple library in 3 days. He could now quote obscure 14th-century poets, and detail the finer points of Go's strategy without conscious thought. The information organized itself in his mind, forming new connections, new ways of thinking. He was no longer just a frantic, scared boy. His intellect was becoming as formidable as his speed. From there, the training shifted to physical control, built upon the foundation of mental stillness. Your phasing is an accident born of chaos, Hattori told him one morning, standing beside a massive granite boulder in the center of the valley. You vibrate at a chaotic frequency, and sometimes, by chance, you pass through things. True control is not about chance. It is about intent. You must learn to control the music of your own cells. His task was simple and terrifying. He was to run at the boulder and, at the last possible second, consciously tune his body's vibrations to match the molecular frequency of the granite, and pass through it. His first dozen attempts were failures. Fear made him flinch, his vibrations scattering chaotically. He would either instinctively veer away at the last second or, in one painful attempt, fail to phase completely and hit the rock. Hitting a stationary object at his speed was not a normal impact. His own speed force aura, a thin, protective layer of kinetic energy he hadn't even known he was generating, took the brunt of it. It felt like being hit by a thunderclap, A full-body shock that sent him tumbling, his ears ringing. He was unharmed, but the sensation was a powerful deterrent. The rock is not your enemy. Hattori's calm voice drifted down from the ridge where he observed. Fear is your enemy. You do not force your way through the rock. You ask its permission, you listen to its song, the slow, deep vibration of stone that has slept for 1,000 years, and you match its tune. Izuku took a deep breath. Listen to its song. It sounded like nonsense. But so had reading a book by running past it. He stood before the boulder, not running. He placed his hand on its surface, closing his eyes. He ignored the cold, rough texture. He focused on the vibration. He tried to feel what Hattori meant. At first, there was nothing. Just cold, dead stone. But he pushed his perception deeper, using the same filtering focus he had learned in the dojo. And then he felt it. A deep, slow, almost imperceptible hum. It was the vibration of the crystalline lattice of the granite itself, the ancient, slumbering energy of the mountain. It was a frequency 100 times slower and deeper than his own frantic buzzing. He had the note. Now he had to match it. He backed away, took a running start, and shot towards the boulder. As he ran, he didn't focus on the stone as an obstacle. He focused on that deep, slow hum. He pulled his own frantic energy inward, forcing its frantic, high-pitched song down, octave by octave. It was an immense strain, like trying to sing a bass note while screaming. He was 5 feet from the rock. His mind was screaming at him to swerve. He ignored it. He focused on the hum, matched the tune. He closed his eyes and pushed his vibration down to that deep, resonant frequency. The moment before impact, the world went cold and silent. He felt a pressurelessness, a brief sense of becoming one with the stone. He opened his eyes. He was on the other side of the boulder, still running. He had done it. At will. He let out a whoop of pure, unadulterated joy, the sound a high-speed chirp that echoed through the valley. He spent the rest of the day phasing through the boulder, through trees, through the very earth beneath his feet, appearing and disappearing like a phantom. It was not an escape anymore. It was a tool. It was control. It was the first true piece of his power that he felt he owned. He was learning the language of the speed force. And for the first time, he felt like he might one day become fluent. He was still a prisoner, but he was finally learning how to pick the lock. The foundation had been laid. Izuku's mind, once a storm-tossed raft, was now becoming a finely tuned vessel, capable of navigating the torrential ocean of the speed force. He had learned to filter, to focus, to perceive the world not as a continuous blur but as an infinite series of distinct moments. But this mental stillness only highlighted the profound disconnect with his physical self. He could think at the speed of lightning, but he still couldn't hold a flower without it disintegrating into dust. He was a god of perception trapped in a body of pure destruction. This was the next, and perhaps most crucial, phase of his training. Hattori called it Kintsugi no Karada, the art of the golden body. It was named after the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with lacquer dusted or mixed with powdered gold, a philosophy of treating breakage and repair as part of the history of an object, rather than something to disguise. You see your body as broken, Hattori explained one crisp morning, the air so thin and cold it felt like glass. They stood not in the valley, but in the temple's serene rock garden. You believe the lightning shattered your connection to the world. This is an illusion. It did not break you, it remade you. You are not a vessel of flesh and blood anymore, not truly. You are a vessel of kinetic energy, barely contained. You cannot force this new body to behave like the old one. You must learn its new language, its new art. You must learn to weave. Hattori's lessons moved from the macro to the micro, from phasing through mountains to the infinitely more complex task of interacting with the small, fragile things of the world. The core concept was molecular resonance, an evolution of the phasing training. If he could match the vibrational frequency of a granite boulder, Hattori reasoned, then he could theoretically match the frequency of anything. The boulder is a simple instrument, Hattori said, his voice a low hum that Izuku could now understand effortlessly. It plays one deep, continuous note. But the world is an orchestra. A cup of tea, a grain of rice, the paper of a book, each has its own unique, complex song. To touch them without breaking them, you must become a master musician. You must learn to play their song with your own body, perfectly, in the instant of contact. This brought them to the central challenge of Izuku's new life, a trial that would become the crucible of his control, the cup of tea. On a flat, weathered pedestal in the center of the rock garden, Hattori placed a single, simple ceramic teacup. It was a beautiful piece of rakuware, its glaze an earthy, imperfect brown, its shape bearing the subtle indentations of its creator's hands. It was filled with steaming green tea, the faint, grassy aroma a ghost from Izuku's former life. Your task is simple in its instruction and impossible in its execution, Hattori stated, his eyes twinkling with the gravity of the challenge. Pick it up. Izuku stared at the cup. It might as well have been the moon. He remembered the Onigiri bomb in the convenience store. He remembered the terror of imagining what his touch could do to a person. This small, quiet object represented every interaction he had been denied, every simple pleasure stolen from him. He took a breath, the cold air doing nothing to calm the frantic thrumming in his chest. He began to run in a wide circle around the garden, his feet silent on the raked gravel, leaving no trace. He needed the motion to build his focus. He approached the pedestal, his mind racing. Listen to its song, he reminded himself. He extended his hand, slowing his approach to a crawl that was still a blur to normal eyes. He focused on the cup, trying to perceive its vibrational signature. It was far more complex than the boulder. It was a chord, not a single note. There was the rough, earthy frequency of the fired clay, the higher, smoother frequency of the glaze, and the shimmering, chaotic vibration of the hot liquid within. He tried to match it, to tune the orchestra of his own cells to this complex harmony. His fingers, shimmering with a faint green aura of kinetic energy, brushed against the ceramic. The result was instantaneous and violent. The cup didn't just shatter, it exploded. A concussive crack echoed through the silent mountains, and the ceramic vaporized into a cloud of fine, superheated dust. The tea flashed into steam, hissing into the cold air. Izuku recoiled, his hand tingling as if shocked. He had failed. Utterly. The silence that followed was heavier than the sound of the explosion. Again, Hattori said, his voice calm and unbothered. He emerged from the temple with an identical cup and placed it on the pedestal. The second attempt ended the same way. As did the third. And the 10th. And the 50th. The pile of ceramic dust at the base of the pedestal grew. Izuku's frustration mounted with each failure. He tried different approaches. He tried vibrating only his hand. He tried creating a cushion of air with his speed to lift it. He tried phasing his fingers just slightly so he could grip it without direct contact. Every attempt ended in a small, violent explosion and the quiet, unwavering command from Hattori, again. He was a creator of dust, a destroyer of teacups. The exercise felt less like training and more like a special kind of torture designed to highlight his own monstrous nature. He was a walking calamity. You are trying to conquer the cup, Hattori observed after Izuku's 100th failure, as the sun began its slow descent behind the jagged peaks. Izuku was vibrating with frustration, a low growl of static in his throat. You approach it as an opponent. It is not. It is a partner. You are not forcing your will upon it. You are asking to dance. You must yield to its rhythm before you can lead. Yield. The word struck him. All his life, he had been fighting. Fighting the bullies, fighting his quirklessness, fighting his limitations. Since the accident, he had been fighting the speed force, fighting his own body. He didn't know how to yield. He stood before the pedestal, another fresh cup of tea steaming gently in the twilight. He didn't run this time. He stood, his legs a blur of motion beneath him, and just watched. He didn't try to analyze it as a problem to be solved. He just observed it. He felt the warmth radiating from it, saw the steam curl in slow, hypnotic patterns. He listened, not just with his ears or his powers, but with his whole being. He let go of the desire to succeed. He let go of the frustration. He let go of the fear. He simply wanted to understand the cup, to appreciate its existence in that single, quiet moment. He extended his hand one more time. He didn't try to replicate the cup's song. He let the song guide him. He felt his own internal vibration shift, not with conscious effort, but with an intuitive, empathetic resonance. His frantic, high-strung energy softened, deepening, aligning itself with the quiet, complex harmony of the ceramic and tea. The green kinetic aura around his fingers softened to a pale, gentle glow. His fingertips touched the cup. There was no explosion. No crack. No steam. There was just contact. He could feel the warmth, the slight roughness of the glaze. It was a real, solid object beneath his touch. A wave of profound shock and relief washed over him, so powerful it almost broke his concentration. He curled his fingers around it, the perfect, resonant hum flowing from the cup through his hand and up his arm. He lifted. The cup rose from the pedestal, steady and whole in his grasp. The tea sloshed gently, a miniature ocean in a ceramic world. He held it for a single, perfect, triumphant second. He stared at it, this impossible trophy, a symbol of a bridge rebuilt between himself and the physical world. A tear of joy traced a path down his cheek, landing with a slow-motion plink on the polished floor. The sound, the tiny impact of the tear, was enough to break his concentration. The perfect harmony shattered. The cup in his hand instantly cracked, then disintegrated into a fine powder, the tea splashing harmlessly to the ground. But it didn't matter. He had done it. For 1 second, he had held the world in his hand, and it had not broken. He looked at Hattori, a wide, incredulous grin spreading across his face, the first genuine, hopeful smile he had worn in months. The old master simply nodded, a deep and profound approval in his eyes. The first step is taken. Now you must learn to hold the dance. The breakthrough with the teacup unlocked a new dimension of control. Izuku began to see the world not just as a collection of objects, but as a symphony of vibrations. He practiced his newfound art on everything. He learned to pluck a single leaf from a branch without tearing it, to touch the delicate paper of a scroll without it crumbling, to catch a single snowflake on his fingertip and observe its intricate geometry before it melted. This mastery of vibration led to an unexpected discovery. He found he could do more than just interact with objects. He could manipulate the world around him. It started with the air. As he ran in the valley, he noticed how his passage created whirlwinds and vortexes. Before, it was a chaotic side effect. Now, with his new control, he wondered if he could command it. He stood in the center of the valley, focusing not on an object, but on the air molecules themselves. He began to run in an impossibly tight circle, no wider than a dinner table. He wasn't just running, he was weaving. He controlled the vibration of his own body to resonate with the air, to pull it, to shape it. The air began to spin, faster and faster, coalescing into a miniature, controlled cyclone at his feet. He could feel it, a swirling column of energy that he was conducting like a maestro. With a flick of his wrist, a gesture that was more for his own mental focus than any physical necessity, he sent the vortex spinning across the valley, where it harmlessly kicked up a swirl of snow and dissipated. He had created a construct of pure kinetic force. He spent days refining this new ability. He learned to create cushions of wind to soften a fall. He could generate targeted, focused gusts of force, powerful enough to snap a thick tree branch from 100 yards away. He was no longer just a runner. He was becoming an elemental, a master of the wind, all born from the endless motion of his own 2 feet. This ability culminated in the development of what he started to think of as his aura. The faint, greenish shimmer of energy that always surrounded him was, he now understood, raw speed force leaking from his body. It was the friction of his existence against a slower reality. Before, it was an uncontrollable byproduct. Now, he learned to command it. By focusing his will, he could draw that energy inward, concentrating it, shaping it. He could weave it into a protective shield around his body, a second skin of green lightning that could absorb impacts and deflect projectiles. It was his new body, a suit of armor woven from the very power that had imprisoned him. He was no longer a victim of the speed force. He was beginning to wear it like a cloak. One afternoon, as Izuku was practicing his control by meticulously re-raking the temple's entire gravel garden 1 pebble at a time with tiny, controlled gusts of wind, a new sound intruded on the mountain's silence. It was the slow, rhythmic whump-whump-whump of a helicopter. Izuku immediately tensed, the kinetic aura around him flaring into a brighter, more intense green. His first instinct was to flee, to become a blur and vanish into the wilderness. Peace, little storm, Hattori's voice calmed him. It is a friend. The helicopter, a sleek, black machine with no official markings, did not land. It hovered 50 feet above the temple courtyard, its rotor wash a gentle, slow-motion gale in Izuku's perception. A crate was lowered on a winch. Izuku watched, his senses on high alert, as Hattori calmly unstrapped the container. Inside was a collection of strange, high-tech equipment. But at the top, resting on a bed of foam, was a simple, folded piece of clothing. It was a tracksuit, but like none he had ever seen. The material was a deep, forest green, with black accents and lines that seemed to hint at circuitry beneath the fabric. It was made of a complex, polymer weave that seemed to shimmer, designed to withstand impossible friction and stress. On the chest was a stylized, minimalist logo, a green lightning bolt that forked into a shape vaguely reminiscent of a Y. For Yagi. Beneath it was a note, written in All Might's familiar, heroic script. Young Midoriya, Master Hattori tells me your control has grown. I am not surprised. Your capacity for dedication was clear to me even on that rooftop. This suit was designed by my best support engineer. It is reinforced with carbon nanotubing and a regenerative fiber. It should be able to withstand the rigors of your speed. It is not a hero costume. Not yet. Think of it as a uniform for your new life, a way to be seen, when you choose to be. There is something else in this crate. A tool for you. We believe you are ready. Izuku looked into the crate. Beneath layers of padding was a large, ruggedized monitor and a complex-looking keyboard. It was a custom-built communication device. He looked at Hattori, a question in his eyes. Tashinori-san believes it is time, the old monk said. He believes you have enough control now. A moment of connection. But the choice is yours. Izuku's heart began to hammer, a frantic rhythm that threatened to upset the calm he had worked so hard to cultivate. His mother. The thought of her, the hope and terror of seeing her again, was overwhelming. The memory of the failed phone call, of the static he had inflicted on her, was a fresh wound. But now he was different. He had control. Maybe. He gave Hattori a sharp, decisive nod. They set up the device in the dojo. It was a marvel of support hero engineering. The monitor had a refresh rate so high it was practically theoretical, designed to display a coherent image to his accelerated eyes. The keyboard was pressure sensitive, able to translate the impossibly fast, high-impact taps of his vibrating fingers into coherent text. Hattori handled the connection, a secure, encrypted satellite link that bypassed conventional networks. Izuku stood before the dark screen, his hands trembling, the new green suit feeling strange and foreign on his skin. He was vibrating more intensely than he had in weeks, his carefully constructed calm threatening to shatter. The screen flickered to life. The image was grainy, a live feed from a camera in a familiar room. His living room. The All Might posters on the wall, the slightly worn sofa, the family photos on the mantelpiece. It was a vision from a past life. And then she walked into the frame. Inko Midoriya looked tired. So profoundly tired. The hollows under her eyes were deeper, her movements slow and fragile. But she was there. She was real. She sat on the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, staring at the camera with a look of desperate, terrified hope. Beside her, out of frame but for a skeletal hand resting reassuringly on her shoulder, was Tashinori Yagi. A choked sob escaped Izuku's throat, a sound too fast to be heard. He wanted to speak, to yell, to tell her everything. But he couldn't. His voice was still a weapon of static. He turned to the keyboard. His fingers, clad in the new gloves of his suit, flew across the keys. The pressure sensors translated the force and speed, the software interpreting his intent. Words appeared on the screen in front of his mother. "Mom," Inko gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Her eyes, already wet, overflowed. "Izuku?" she whispered, her voice a fragile, perfect sound that pierced his heart. "Oh, Izuku, is it really you?" He typed again, faster now, the words pouring out of him, a torrent of apology and love and reassurance held back for months. "It's me. I'm okay. I'm so sorry for everything. I'm safe." He could see Tashinori lean in and whisper something to her, likely explaining that Izuku could see and hear her, but could only respond by typing. Oh, my baby, she cried, her body shaking with relieved sobs. I don't care about any of that. I needed to see you. To know you were real. She looked around the room, as if he might be hiding in a corner. Where are you? Are you hurt? I'm in a safe place. A temple. In the mountains. I'm with a teacher. He's helping me. He wanted to tell her everything. About the running, the slow-motion world, the phasing, the teacups. But he couldn't. It was too much, too monstrous. He had to be her source of comfort, not her source of fear. I have a power now, Mom. A quirk. It's complicated. But I'm learning to control it. He saw Toshinori give a small, proud nod out of the corner of the frame. A quirk, she repeated, a strange, watery smile touching her lips. You always wanted one so badly. The bittersweet irony of the statement hung heavy in the air between them, across hundreds of miles and a dimensional gap. They stayed like that for 10 minutes, a stilted, heartbreaking, and beautiful conversation. She told him about the neighbors bringing food, about how All Might and the detective had been so kind. He told her he was training hard, that he was eating, a white lie, but a necessary one, and that he missed her Katsudon more than anything. He couldn't speak, he couldn't touch her, but he could see her. And she, for the first time, could see the evidence of her son, safe and alive, in the words appearing on the screen. It wasn't a true reunion. It was a conversation with a ghost. But it was enough. It was everything. When Toshinori gently signaled that the satellite window was closing, a fresh wave of panic seized Izuku. Don't go, he typed, the words appearing frantic on the screen. It's okay, Izuku, his mother said, wiping her tears, her voice gaining a sliver of its old strength. It's okay. This is more than I could have hoped for. Just promise me you'll keep training. Promise me you'll stay safe. I promise. And promise me you'll call again, she added, her voice thick with emotion. I will. I love you, Mom. I love you too, my sweet boy, she whispered. My hero. The screen went black. Izuku stood there, his hands still hovering over the keyboard, his body trembling with the aftershocks of the connection. He had seen his mother. He had made her smile. He had called her a ghost, but he realized now that he was the ghost, haunting her life from a distance. And for a few precious moments, he had been real. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Hattori. Izuku didn't flinch. He leaned into the touch, a student leaning on his master, a boy finding an anchor in a world that still threatened to tear him away. The journey was far from over. His curse was not lifted. But the golden repair on his shattered life was beginning to hold. He was no longer just a body of kinetic energy. He was weaving himself a new one, thread by painful thread.